Hello and welcome to this webinar on accounts payable functions in SAP Business One. My name is Ketan Solanki, and here are the topics we'll be covering in today's session. So there's a bit to cover in the next 45 minutes or so, as we may not be able to cover the level of detail you may require in this session, but as you're aware, MicroChannel does offer tailored training sessions not only for the topics we're covering today, but for all modules of SAP Business One. So let us begin. So start with, let's have a look at some of the setup that you'd have to do to get the accounts payable functions configured. So going into SAP Business One now, and to start with, let's have a look at the setup on payment terms, because that dictates what the due dates are on the accounts payable invoices that are entered. So under setup, so administration, setup, and business partners, there is a setting called payment terms, and in here you can define various terms. So for example, in this case, it's 30 days from date of invoice. You can also say that the invoice is going to fall due 30 days from the start of the month or 30 days from the end of the month, and so on. So that's pretty much definable by you, as well as defining whether the date is based on the document date, the posting date, or the system date. The other interesting thing here is that you can also define cash discounts. So if you are getting early payment discounts, then you can define those in here to say, in this example, if the invoice is paid within 10 days, then there's a 2% discount at the time of the payment. So that's the payment terms setup. The next thing we're going to look at is the setup of the banks. So that's under setup, administration setup, banking, and in there you define all the different banks you deal with. So you select your country, put in the the 3-digit code for the bank, the name of the bank. I mean, that's really the key information you need to set up from a bank setup perspective. And then once you've done that, then you can define your house bank accounts. So in the house bank account, you can define, again, the bank code, which we had set up in the previous screen. Specifically for Australian localization, you set up your BSB code under the branch and the account number in the account number field, the link back to the GL account, and then the details on the address of the bank. And that's all purely information only. One of the key information for the Australian localization when it comes to creating the bank file, the ABA bank file, is you've got to fill in the fields for user number 1 and user number 2. So the user number 1 is just the bank code, and the bank's 3-digit code. And then user number 2 is the 6-digit code, the bank identification number that you get from your bank. They would give it to you. It's not the BSB, it's a different code. In the other localizations, you'd have something similar, but not exactly this. So once you've set up your bank, you can then define your payment methods. So that's also under banking in the setup, and its payment methods. And let's have a look at a specific one. So here, this one here is the outgoing payments for the bank account that we had just seen earlier. There is the bank account selected, and then this is the file format that's used for generating the file. So as a standard in the Australian localization, we have 2 file formats that come in the box. One is an ANZ specific format, and the other is just a standard generic. They're both ABA file formats. If these file formats do not meet the requirements, you might have a bank that has a different file format, or you're in a country where SAP is not providing a standard file format, then we can use the electronic file manager application that comes with SAP to create the specific file format for your country or for your bank. The other settings that are interesting is one here called Post to GL Interim Account. So when you're running your payment visit to generate the batch of payments, you can have those going into an interim account, and then when the funds get cleared from your bank account, you can journal it out of the interim account and show the impact of the transaction in your actual bank account. The other one here is the currency selection. So, you know, if you're paying in Australia, then you could set to say that, I mean, this file format or this payment method is only applicable for a particular currency. All right, so that covers some of the setup that needs to be done. Let's have a look at the business partner master record. So in particular, we're looking at the suppliers here because this is more accounts payable focused. So just going to go in and find my supplier called Acme Associates. And the main information we're going to focus on is the payment terms that we saw earlier when we set it up. So in here, you can see that this supplier has been assigned the payment terms of now 30 days. And here is their bank account. So it's an Australian bank, it's CBA. There's the account code and there's the BSB. Now, you can't actually type the information directly on the screen. You see this browse button, you click on that, and in here you can put all the information in. You can have multiple bank accounts, but you've got to select a default, and that's the one that will be used inside the transaction or when the payment run is executed. So that's the payment, the bank account details. Let's now have a look at the payment run tab. And in here, you can define the bank account from which you'll be paying the supplier, what is the default house bank account. And also you can have different payment methods, and you can define which one is the default payment method for this particular supplier. Now, when you're entering an AP invoice, you can select any one of these three because these are all the ones that are active or included against this particular supplier. So if I had unticked one or two of these, then these would not be available against that particular supplier. Okay, and the default one is the one that gets selected when the transaction is created. The other thing you can also do is do a payment block on a supplier level. So in here, you can go in and say, you know, I do not want to pay this supplier at all. And then in the list of, you know, you can also then define a list of reasons why that would be the case. So this again is user definable. You can go in and create your own list of reasons, and you can set one of those up. So right now what I've done is I've said we're actually putting this particular supplier on payment block. Okay, let's just move into the accounting tab and just have a look at one of the settings in there that's relevant, and that's the payment consolidation. So in this case, if you are dealing with a supplier who's got many branches, and you know they might be invoicing you directly from those branches, or you might be raising purchase orders against those branches, but the final statement comes from a head office account, then you can put the head office account business partner in here, and then you can have your you know, individual branches set up as separate suppliers in the system. All right, and the final thing on the business partner master data is the if you can go into the account balance, you can obviously see the balance and what's made up of, but from here you can also run the aging report. So if I clicked on the aging report here, it's pre-populating the supplier for me, and it's also defaulting the date to today. And if I then run it, it's going to show me the aging report for this supplier, you know, by listing all the transactions, and then I can see, you know, the aging buckets. Here, I can also set how I want to see the aging. So right now, the aging set up to do it based on the due date. I can also run the aging based on the posting date or the document date. Let me just, if I exit out of this, and if I just remove the filters, and let's run it across all suppliers. And now I can see an overall aging across all my suppliers. I can collapse the overall and see a summary view of the world. What you can also see is the balance due total. And because I'm looking at the data in multiple currencies, I don't see a total. I can change and say, show me the information in local currency. Then I can see the information in a total with the transaction being translated to the local currency equivalent amount. One other thing in here is this consider connected customers. So if you've got a customer who's also a supplier, then you can have those two things linked together. And then when you run the aging, then you can see the overall position based on the connections of the two. So if I just get out of this screen and just quickly look at where it is. So there it is. Here I can select on the business partner record, I can select a customer and link it to my supplier. Okay, covers the business partner part. I'll have a look at just the accounts payable invoice creation process and how you do it. So to start off with, the accounts payable invoice transaction is under purchasing AP called AP invoice. So you could enter an AP invoice as a standalone. So there's a supplier, there's no purchase orders, there's no goods receipts, nothing. It's just a straight on pick a supplier. Either you enter a item invoice if you are and if you're receiving stock, or you can do a service invoice if it was for something relating to a service. Now, once you've done that, you can populate the rest of the information and off you go. But generally what happens is, you might have a transaction already in the system that you're going to draw down on. So you might have particularly for inventory type transactions, you might have a goods receipt PO. So what you can do is then go and say, I've picked my supplier, copy from goods receipt PO or copy from purchase order, one of those. And then the system will list all the open goods receipt POs. You select the one you want to draw down, you select the lines that have come through, and you load up the transaction like that. So that's one way of, that's another way of entering an AP invoice. And the third way of doing it is you could go in, select an open transaction, could be a purchase order, for instance. Let me just quickly enter one. So I'll have a purchase order, and now that the purchase order is in the system and I've got the invoice in front of me, I can just convert that into an AP invoice and then just go and add it away. Now, some of the other things to look at. So in the logistics tab, you can see the address where the goods are to be shipped. But more importantly, on the accounting tab, you can put a payment block on this particular AP reserve invoice. So there may be, a dispute on the invoice, and you can come in later on and do this as well. You can just say, well, this invoice has a payment block. The other thing worth noting is this payment method. So we saw those payment methods on the master record, and you can see that that's the one that's been defaulted, but I can select a different one. I can also go in and select a different payment term. So, it was net 30 days, and which is why the due date is sitting at 30 days after my document date. But if I had a different term, I can change it here just for this particular invoice. Okay. Now, I'm not going to save this yet. Just want to run through some other bits around the AP invoice process. So particularly approvals. So as you would know, that SAP Business One has the ability to create workflow type approvals. So what I've done is set up a very simple one. So in here under administration, approval process, and approval templates, I've defined an AP invoice approval process where a particular user called Alex, when Alex creates an AP invoice, it needs to go for approval to this particular stage, and I can have multiple stages. So if I have multiple stages, what happens is once the first stage has passed approval, then it moves to the second stage, and then if there are other stages, then you can keep pushing the transaction through the different stages. And then within a stage itself, if I open up this stage here, what I've done is I've opened it up by drilling down, but you can also go through administration, approval process, and approval stages. It'll open up the same screen. In here, I've said for this particular approval stage, I need one approver and one rejecter, and the approver is me in this case. Now, if I could have multiple authorizers, and then I could still say, well, maybe I need two people to approve before it gets released. And I could say that, you know, as long as one person has rejected it, the transaction gets rejected. So these are all, you know, available, and there's a fair amount of flexibility around the approval process. And then the final setting is in the terms area. So this is where you say when the approval process triggers. And well, you could have it so that it always triggers. You can also have it based on some sort of criteria. So yeah, what I've done is I've just set up my approval process to trigger when the document total is greater than $200. So anything less than 200 won't go for an approval. Anything greater than 200 will have an approval. And then what we've also got is the ability to define user-based approval criteria. So it could be certain cost center needs to go to a certain person. It could be that a GL account. It could be based on the person, and so on. It could also be multiple levels. So, you know, you could have between $0 and $1,000, it's person X, and then if it's greater than $1,000, it might have to go to someone else. So these are all configurable through the approval setup. Now let's have a look at how that works in practice. So I will go into user Alex. So that's now I'm looking at user Alex's login, and I'm going to raise a AP invoice. And as you saw, the criteria was that if the amount is greater than $200, it will go for an approval. So I'm going to select my supplier. I'm going to put in a description. So let's say this was an electricity bill. I'll go in and select my GL account. And I go in and put an amount in, say $1,000. What you notice is right now the tax hasn't been calculated, and that's because I have not entered a posting date yet. So the tax calculations are driven by the date. As soon as I put a date in, you can see the tax has come through, and then I click on Add. Now, by the way, you might see some features that are slightly different from the version you're running. I'm running this on version 10, patch level 2. That's a fairly recent version. There's been a new release since, but this is a fairly recent version. So click on Add, and I get this pop-up. It says, you know, this transaction requires an approval process. I could put a approval request remark, please approve, and click OK. And so now this transaction is now sitting in an approval stage, if I switch back, I can already see in my login, there is a pop-up message saying there's a request for an approval. I can go in, I can review. From here, I can even look at the actual transaction. And you'll see that the transaction shows up and it's saying it's in draft mode, it's pending. If I'm happy with it, I can approve it. And then what happens is once it's approved, user Alex should get a pop-up message. There it is, document generation approved. They go in, they drill into the approved document, and then now they can save this away as a real transaction. So that allows you to control, the entry of the accounts payable invoices through the approvals process. And as I said earlier, you can also then, if need be, put the invoice on a payment block if appropriate. Okay, so that's the AP invoice process. Let's now look at how you enter your one-off payments. So you're just paying a supplier one-off basis rather than via a payment visit. So we go into the outgoing payments, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the supplier we had put on a payment block earlier. So I select, and I can go in and say I'm paying that invoice, and let's say I'm part paying it. I'm only paying $1,000 on it, and then I go into the money bag, which I can do from there. I can do from there, or I can right click and also say, payment means from there. Any one of those opens up the payment means screen. It's let's say it's a direct deposit. I put the amount in, and I click OK, and then I click add. Now, when I click add, the system's warning me. It's saying the business partner is blocked for payment. Do you still want to continue? I can choose to continue here and say yes, I'm ignoring that, or I can click no. Now, this is at this stage, this is not a hard block. This is not stopping you. The payment block is only warning you. So if I go in and let's just remove the block. Let's say we don't really want to have the block anymore. But let's say in its place, I go in and I select, let's say, that invoice. And okay, so the invoice is also on a payment block. Okay, so the customer is, or the supplier is no longer on a payment block, but this particular invoice, the first one, is on a payment block. The second one is not on a payment block, right? So I've got two AP invoices. What I can do now is if I go in and run the same process again, I pick the same supplier, and if I select that invoice and that invoice, so remember what the first one is on a payment block. In fact, I can see it here. There's an asterisk against this invoice telling me that invoice is on a payment block. I've chosen to ignore it, and I still want to go ahead and do it. I pick my payment means. If I go OK, and I try to add, now the message is slightly different. It's saying to me one or more selected documents are blocked for payment. So not the supply is blocked for payment, but one of the documents is blocked for payment. And I can again choose to ignore and make the payment. I will not do that. Let me just say no. Let's just, what we might do is just pay this one. So I'll go back into the money bag, put the right amount in, and process the payment. So that's effectively, paid the invoice in the system. The other thing you can see here is that when you are making a payment, and if you are receiving some sort of a discount, you can put that in there as a percentage. So let's say I'm getting a 2% discount, or The discount could be that I'm getting, $1,000 off, and you can just put that in, and the system will then take care of that when the payment is processed. Okay, so from here, let's now have a look at the actual process of running the payment wizard and generating payments for a number of suppliers. So, doing a batch run using the payment wizard. So that particular function is available under banking and payment wizard. As it suggests, it's a wizard, so it asks you a series of questions, and then the end result is that you can select a bunch of invoices to pay. So I'm going to start a new payment run. I can also load an existing one. So where we've already made a payment and you want to see the runs, you can do that from there. But I'm going to do a new one. So I'm going to start a new one. I'm doing it as an outgoing payment. I'm doing it as a bank transfer. Those are the main details. You get a select here. Then I go next and I say, I want to add a certain number of suppliers to the list. I've got a few filter options. I can filter by supplier group. I can filter by supplier properties, or I can just go add to list and it just brings everything in. And then I could, select and filter and remove or add suppliers as I feel I need to. The next screen here, this is where you can do additional filtering around, what transactions are to be included in the run. You can say, well, I want to include everything that's due until up till the 1st of September, for example. And so that'll only consider anything that's got a due date up till that date. I go next here. Then here it's showing me the different payment methods that are applicable. I can select the one that I want to run. This max outgoing amount will default to the balance in the bank account. If you do wish to pay a greater amount than that, you can just simply overtype the amount, and then you can pay a greater amount. Let's go next here. Then it's showing me the supplier invoices that are to be paid. Okay, so I've got a summary view. I can click on expand all, and that'll list a bunch of invoices that are needing to be paid. What you'll also see is if I click on non-included transactions, it will show me anything that's been blocked out. So here, see, this particular invoice, it's on a payment block. So in this case, the invoice didn't even appear. We cannot pay a blocked invoice through the payment wizard. It just simply will not appear. And likewise, if I actually went in and put this supplier on a payment hold, so if I went in and said supplies on a payment block, and if I just go back and run this again, the supplier has disappeared, right? Doesn't even show up now. And if I say non-included transactions, it's telling me what's the reason this invoice is not showing. Business partner in the selected document is blocked. This will show all sorts of information. It may be the document's blocked, business partner is blocked. It could also be that you have insufficient funds. If you've in the previous screen, in here where we've said max outgoing, if the max outgoing amount was less than the total value of the invoices that could be potentially paid, then some of the invoices will not be listed and they will appear in the non-included transactions section. What I'll do is go back in and make that make our business partner available to be for payment runs again. We'll remove the block. Okay, I'm going to go back, go next again. All right, so now we're on the screen where it's listing all the invoices. I can go expand. And from here, I can then choose specific invoices to pay. So I might pay that invoice, and I might pay that invoice and that invoice, and I might pay that invoice. I can do that. I can also change the amount that's being paid. I can reduce it. I can say I'm going to part pay this invoice for whatever reason. I've got the option to do that as well. What I can also do is add a manual row. So if I've got to pay a supplier, but there's no corresponding invoice, or maybe that I'm refunding a customer and there's no invoice, I can select the record. I can select the bank account, and I can then add that onto this payment run if I wanted to. So when I go next here, then I've got a few options here. I could go and just save the selection criteria, which means that, you know, nothing's been marked for payment, nothing's happened, but I can come back later and rerun this, and then it will have all the other settings in the previous screens selected, apart from the actual invoices, because the invoices are the actual recommendations. So you can save the selection criteria. You could save the recommendations. Now, if you save the recommendations, you can then bring those up again. Just remember that once the recommendations have been saved, those invoices will not appear in any subsequent payment runs until the recommendation that you've created has been executed or cancelled. And when you pull up the recommendations that have been saved, you can only deselect transactions from those recommendations. You cannot add more recommendations to it. What you have to do is, if you want to add more recommendations, you'd have to cancel that payment run and then start all over. Third option is to execute the payment order run. So in this case, what happens is a payment order run is kind of like allows you to run and set up mark all the invoices to be paid, except that the payment transaction doesn't get recorded in SAP. All that happens is you run the payment order run, you can generate the file for the bank, and then you can upload the file with the bank, and then once the funds have been cleared from your bank, you can come back here and then you can execute the payment order run and turn it into a real payment. And at that point, the outgoing payments will be created in the background. And then the final option is to execute it as you were walking through it. And when you do the execution, the payments get created as well. So let me just do that. I go next. It says executing the payment visit will also generate the payment documents. Do you wish to continue? If I say yes, it creates the payments. I can go and look at that. I can say, show me the payment summary. These are the transactions that were created. These were the suppliers that were paid. I can drill in and see the individual ones. So here's the outgoing payment that was created automatically. You can see that it also tells us that it was created via the payment visit. You can also look at, let's say, the bank account summary. It'll show you which bank account the money is coming out of. You can see the, payment method summary and so on. So you got all of those options. And then down here, you've also got this ability to create the bank file. You can go in there and you click on it and define the path where the file is going to get saved. You can click on create file. And when you click on it, it will attempt to create the file. And if there is a problem with the creation of the file, which I can see I've had, it's going to error out. And the error message is saying that 3 records were found and payment reference number is missing, basically. Right, no value in mandatory field, payment number, error, payment reference number should not be empty. So I cannot actually generate the file. Now, what can I do in this case? I can go back. I can look at the invoices that were paid. So that was the first one. It's saying, well, this field is mandatory. There should have been something in there. And likewise, this field is on this invoice as well. This field should have had something in there. And finally, let's look at that one. And that should have had something in there as well. Now what happens is I can now go back. This is not going to re-execute it. The payment process already run, so I can just go next. Now the button's no longer available to be clicked. What I have to do now is I have to say recreate the file. I say yes, saying the table's been created, and then I go click the bank file again. I go create file. Okay, and I'm still getting some errors. It's saying, you know, something else is missing. It's saying the branch number on the account is missing, so my supply isn't set up correctly. I've got missing data on the supply. So again, we can go back. We saw our first supply already had the information. Let's quickly go and see the second supplier. And saying that the information is slightly incorrect, saying this field should be 7 digits. So it's doing some validations. So you need to make sure that, you know, the information, it's doing some basic validation to make sure you've got the right information. All right, so there, and we'll look at this supplier as well while we're at it. And I've probably got a similar problem here. And I would say that should be it, but let's find out. So go back next, recreate the file. Click on the bank file button, click create file. And okay, so it's done it. It's put it, or it's passed the test process, and there's a preview of the file. And then you've got to click the create file a second time, which then saves the file into that C temp folder. So if we go into the folder, and there's the file that was created. You then have to upload that file to onto your bank system. And you can see there's that identification number that was set up in the house bank account right at the beginning. Okay, so that now, in case you've already exited the screen and then you've got to come back and recreate the file, you can always do that by reopening the payment wizard and then saying load the saved runs, view executed, find the payment, go to the final step, and then you can do the recreate file process and regenerate the bank file after that. As I said before, standard file formats available for Australia. I don't think there is any for New Zealand. but there is the capability of setting these up via the EFM process. And also, if you've got international funds transfers type file formats that that aren't covered by the standard local file formats, those are also a possibility. Okay, so now we're just going to quickly look at how foreign currency type transactions can be processed as one-off payments. So we go back into banking, outgoing payments. We're going to pick a supplier that's in a different currency. Let's say this supplier here. Let's say this supplier here is in euros, and there's a couple of invoices that are outstanding. The currency exchange rate comes through based on the exchange rate tables in the system. If that exchange rate isn't the exchange rate you're getting, then you can obviously change it. If you've got a foreign currency bank account, then you probably don't have to do too much with that. But if you've got, if you're paying in Australian dollars, or if you're paying in your local currency, then you may have to manipulate that. So you select this, you select the invoice being paid or invoices being paid. You go into the money bags, and in here, once again, you put the date and you put the amount in. So right now I'm putting it in euros. You can also say, well, show me what that Australian dollar amount is. And if the exchange rate is a bit different, then you need to just recalculate that up front and put the right exchange rate so you get the correct local currency amount on the transaction. Okay, and then you add it away. So this is, it's not too different from doing local currency ones. All right, so that kind of concludes the training part of this session. There's a couple of topics additionally that I just wanted to touch on, and that was around the AP automation process. Now, there's kind of two options around this. The first option is EDI. So you might have a supplier that's wanting to do EDI with you, where your purchase orders to them need to go via a EDI process, and then they would send their invoices back to you via EDI. Now that obviously is a possibility, and if you've got suppliers that are interested in doing that, then we certainly can help you out with that via some integration work. So that's the first piece. The second piece is doing some sort of AP automation, and in there as well, there's probably a number of products out there. The one that we're generally working with is called Concur. Concur is a SAP company, and they've got two solutions. There's an expense management solution and an AP automation solution. The AP automation solution has got the ability to do OCR, so you might be receiving your supplier's invoices at a particular email address. The Concur solution then scans those, reads them, and converts them into AP invoices for approval, and then you can do all the approval through Concur, and then you end up with an AP invoice straight into SAP. The main reason you'd be doing something like this is you've got very high volumes of AP invoices coming through, and the data entry process requires a lot of labor, and you're needing to put additional resources to cover that. Well, something like an AP automation process would help you manage that process a lot easier without adding more staff into the mix. That covers the presentation. Thanks for your time and attention. If you do have any questions, please enter those in the GoToMeeting panel. Just in the meantime, if you do need any further information about any of the topics covered today or any other additional training, you can see the list of account managers and contacts that you should reach out to for that information.